Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for coming. Tonight, we're very happy to host Venerable Tenzin Legtsok. He is the son of our dear member, Carol Vogel. He is a monk at Sera Jey. He's been there for 17 years, I think. Studying toward his, he's been at Sera for 14 years and ordained for 17 years. And he's studying toward his Geshe degree, which will take him about another 5 or 6 years. He's a native of Virginia, and he comes back occasionally, and we're very happy to welcome him. So.
Okay, thanks. Celebrating 4 major events in Shakyamuni Buddha's life. In the 1 year it begins with the the Days of Miracles, when the Buddha competed in displays of miraculous powers with Tirthakas. And then Sakadawa, which was celebrated about 7 weeks ago. And then today, the wheel turning day. And then the last of the 4 is the descent from Tushita heaven. So today is in 1 year, it's the 3rd of the major Buddhist holidays, celebrating the Buddha's first turning the wheel of Dharma in Sarnath, near Varanasi in India. So because of that, then I'd like to start with homage to Shakyamuni Buddha that His Holiness Dalai Lama usually recites at the beginning of talks and major events. So I'll recite it in Tibetan and try to roughly translate it. Kangi tukshin nerzunde dawa tamje bambeche dambe duni dunzipa gautam de la chaselo. So it means roughly he who compelled by great compassion, Kangi tukshin nerzunde dawa tamje bambeche, in order to dispel all wrong views. So he taught the ultimate truth, or the ultimate, the ultimate truth, or the ultimate meaning, the most profound meaning, to Gautama Buddha. Then I prostrate. So since this is not a formal teaching, then there's no need to do other prayers like you probably usually do at the beginning of a teaching. Okay. So then we have about an hour together. So I thought the Dana on behalf of the center requested me to talk about, mostly in celebration of, because this is not only the celebration of Wheel Turning Day, but also International Sangha Day, right? As celebrated by the International Mahayana Institute, which is the, as designated by the International Mahayana Institute, which is the organization of ordained monks and nuns in the FPMT, basically. So they designated this as within FPMT as a day to also celebrate and honor kind of the ordained Sangha. So I think kind of more in that vein than the Kadampa Center requested me to give some talk about life at Sera, life as a monk. But I'd like to use the opportunity to also to talk about, well, kind of the importance of Sangha for the Dharma in general. And especially, I mean, because most of you who are, well, all of you are here now in the audience are all lay people. So as lay Buddhists, what's the importance of Sangha? And especially for Dharma centers in the West. A little bit about that, and then a little bit about life at Sera as well. And then Donna invited me for lunch the other day and told me that Geshe also asked that I talk about the importance of debate in the monastic education, and I guess in Tibetan Buddhism in general, the importance of debate. So I'll speak about that a little bit. So it probably won't be a very cohesive talk because I'm trying to cover a lot of different things. Yeah, but I want to talk about something you're interested in, so I'll look forward to hearing any questions that you have. Yeah, but I won't lead any meditation, except maybe at the beginning we can take a few moments just to set a positive motivation to make sure what we do is whatever we do together becomes a virtuous action, right? So if you can, then yeah, recollect the importance of today that the Buddha taught the Dharma, and as in the verse I recited, the reason the Buddha taught the Dharma is because all this is in order to relieve the suffering of the world, because suffering exists, because sentient beings experience problems and hardship, and not only in one life, but from life to life experience birth, aging, old age, sickness, and death again and again, and then all the other kind of problems that we all know of from our own experience in daily life. And because the root of all those problems is wrong views, right, is kind of ignorance and misperceiving the way we exist, the way others exist, the way things exist. So in order to relieve sentient beings of suffering and lead them to perfect happiness, then the Buddha taught the Dharma. So recollecting that, then we can generate the motivation that in order to reduce and eliminate my own problems and the problems of others and the suffering of the world at large, then for that reason I'll engage in learning something about the Buddhist teachings and the Buddhist community. Or any other motivation you'd like to generate. And if you can, try to generate bodhicitta, the aspiration to achieve full enlightenment in order to achieve the welfare of all sentient beings. Okay. So let me put, I don't see a clock in here. Put my clock here. Okay. So, okay. So the Buddha achieved enlightenment about 2,600 years ago. And then at first it said, it said that he thought no one would understand or be able to follow the path that he discovered, the path to full enlightenment. So he didn't teach. But then Brahma and Indra, I think, offered him a wheel and a conch and said that there would be some people who could understand and follow the path that he discovered, so that he should teach, and requested him to teach the Dharma. So that kind of sets the precedent in the Buddhist community these days that we don't proselytize, that it's thought inappropriate to try to explain and teach the Dharma to people when they haven't requested or expressly shown an interest, or unless you clearly know, most likely by clairvoyance, that it would be very beneficial to teach someone something. So then about 7 weeks after his enlightenment, then the Buddha went with his clairvoyance. He looked around the world to see who would be the most suitable disciples to teach the Dharma. And he saw that there were the 5 virtuous friends with whom he'd been practicing austerities along the Naranjana River for 6 years before he achieved enlightenment. So there's a famous statue where the Buddha is very emaciated. You can see his ribs and the hairs, and he has a mustache and in the Gandharva style. So that statue is representing the austerities, like self-mortification, and especially fasting, that Prince Gautama, Prince Siddhartha, kind of voluntarily underwent before achieving enlightenment. So he had 5 friends that also engaged in those austere practices with him. And then when Prince Siddhartha decided to take, when he saw that by practicing fasting in such austere way that he was just destroying his body and weakening his own mental powers and actually hindering himself on the path, then he decided to take basic food because he could see that gave vigor and energy to his body, which also allowed his mind to become more clear and lucid, and then he could make quicker progress in discovering like what are the causes of suffering with the energy that comes from sustenance, the sustenance of food. So when he started taking gross food again, then those 5 virtuous friends thought that he'd kind of taken the easy road and abandoned real serious practice, and they abandoned him and left. So then after enlightenment, he thought, well, they would be the most suitable kind of disciples because they already knew sort of what I don't know the reasons, but anyway, so they were dwelling in Deer Park outside of Varanasi in Sarnath. So then he went there, and then he taught the 4 Noble Truths. So it's called the, what is the sutra called? I think it's called the Wheel Turning Sutra or something. But it's a very short sutra. It's only about maybe 5-6 pages long in Tibetan. And in that, the Buddha taught the 4 Noble Truths 3 times in slightly different ways. So that was the first turning of the Wheel of Dharma. So that's what we celebrate on this day. So the reason, and then those first 4 disciples actually, they became the first they became the first 4 fully enlightened monks after Shakyamuni Buddha. So in this age of the Dharma, I mean, in Buddhist cosmology, there's no beginning to time, and there's beginningless universes and kind of Buddhas and eons in which the Buddha's teachings exist and flourish. Like before this, there's no beginning to time. So in this fortunate eon, when 1,000 Buddhas will come, Shakyamuni Buddha is the 4th who will come. And so each of those 4 Buddhas, they all display showing these 12 sublime deeds. So the deed we celebrate today is teaching the Dharma. So in this time when Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings arose at a time when the Buddha Dharma didn't exist in the world, basically, and then taught the Dharma, then Shakyamuni Buddha was the first fully ordained monk to exist in this time. And then those five disciples were the next 5 fully ordained monks to exist. So yeah, I'm kind of going into this detail because I'm studying Vinaya now, and this is some of the stuff. This is some of the stuff that we've been studying this year recently. So I have a chance to show off a little bit. But it's also interesting, I think, to think, well, I mean, we're celebrating the Buddhist Sangha today. So when did that start? Well, it started with Shakyamuni Buddha. He's the first monk. So of course now, I mean, most of you probably know that if someone wants to become a monk, they have to go through some preliminary kind of vetting a little bit, and training and education. And then there's a ceremony, like most Western aspirants to be monks or nuns go to Dharamsala and then request ordination from His Holiness, or sometimes some take in the West with Lama Zopa or other Lama Zopa Rinpoche or other renowned teachers. But there's a whole ceremony where, like for a Getzel, you should have 4 fully ordained monks. For a Gelong, ideally you have 10 fully ordained monks, and then there's different steps to the ceremony. But of course, well, how do you think Shakyamuni Buddha became fully ordained? Because there's no fully ordained monks then, right? So he became fully ordained simply by by kneeling in front of a stupa and saying like, I renounce this life, kind of, and cutting off his hair and abandoning his princely clothes. He exchanged his clothes for the clothes of a hunter. So then he wore symbol clothes. These days, I mean, there's 4 abandonments. You abandon your lay clothes, you abandon your lay hair, so you have shaved head, and then you wear robes in place of lay clothes. You abandon your lay name, so you take an ordained name. And then the most important is you abandon your identification of yourself as a lay person, and you generate the identification of yourself as an ordained person. And you should do that even so that in your sleep you recognize, in your dreams you recognize that you're that you're an ordained person. So yeah, the Buddha, I'm not sure he took a new name, but when he first taught in Sarnath, then he told those first 5 disciples that they shouldn't call him by Gautama, by his regular name, but I'm not sure what he said exactly, but I think he said, you should call me by the Tathagata, which means the one thus gone, which means the one who's gone beyond samsara, and you could even say beyond the state of a sentient being, become a fully enlightened being. So in that way, you could say he exchanged his name as well. And then also, of course, he had a different identity when he committed himself to that path of a renunciate. Because basically, I mean, another name for ordained person is one who's gone forth, which means you've gone forth from the lay life or the householder's life, which means really not that, which means you've renounced the let's see, not the desire so much, but you've decided basically that you don't want to live in a household where you have to support a spouse and children and be and uphold obligation to different social ties and commitments, as most lay people do, but rather that you're going to devote yourself to spiritual practice as much as you can. So for that reason, then you live in a different place, away from sort of your family and the people you've grown up with, so that you're not compelled to engage, spend so much time and energy kind of in those relationships, and you can devote yourself more to generating realization, so that later you can benefit people in a much more profound way than you could otherwise. So Shakyamuni Buddha is the first fully ordained person, and then those first 5 disciples in Sarnath were the second sort of set of ordained people. So they generated the vows in their mind stream through the force of realizing the Four Noble Truths, through the force of generating, actually, if you know the 5 paths, there's the path of seeing, which is where you directly realize emptiness. So at that point, you directly realize all the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths. So it was by the force of realizing the Four Noble Truths, then they became Arya beings, and then the vows are naturally generated in their mind streams. So they generated the vows not through a ceremony or something like that, but by realizing the Four Noble Truths directly. And then for the first 12 years of the Buddhist Sangha, so that, I guess you could say at that time is really when the Buddhist Sangha came into being, because I mean, there's the ultimate Sangha and conventional Sangha, but the Buddhist Sangha is, I mean, we use the word Sangha, we can use in a broad way, and we can use it in a narrow way, and in an even narrower way. So the broadest way is just spiritual friends. I mean, like we're all a Sangha together, like everybody who engages in the same spiritual path together with you, and is a support to you, and you serve as a support to them, and it's like a spiritual family. So in the broadest way, then we're all part of the same Sangha. But then in a slightly narrower and more kind of traditional way, then typically the Buddhist Sangha is described as being, I guess in the broader way, there's the spoken of the 4 followers of the Buddha, which means basically ordained men and women, and lay men and women, or what is it? Usually we use the Sanskrit term for lay followers of the Buddha. Upasaka and upasikas. Yeah, that's the Sanskrit term. It means, I'm not sure how you translate it in English. Does anybody know? Upasaka, upasika. Yeah, well, householder is a little different. But it basically means you've taken it's someone, I mean, an actual upasaka, upasika is someone who's taken the 5 lay vows. You know, the 5 lay vows. If you formally take refuge in Buddha Dharma Sangha, and then you take the vows of not killing, not stealing, not lying, abandoning intoxicants, and abandoning adultery. If you take those vows, then you're a kind of fully qualified lay follower of the Buddha. So the broader Sangha community is the male and female lay vow holders, and then the lay vow holders, and the male and female ordained ordained vow holders. But then more narrowly, it's said, like the Buddha said, wherever there are 4 fully ordained monks, then in that place the Buddha's teachings exist. So a more narrower definition of the Sangha is the fully ordained monks and nuns. Of course, in the Tibetan tradition, the fully ordained nuns don't exist now. So that's something that is a big conversation point, like whether that will be reestablished again or not, and whether that's possible or not. But fully ordained nuns do exist in the Chinese tradition. So in Taiwan, there are a lot. And some nuns from this tradition also go there and take ordination.
So are they like disciples, or is that a different meaning?
Well, disciples just means like you follow a certain spiritual teacher, you're a disciple of that teacher. But I mean, if you're Buddhist, we're all disciples of the Buddha, because we all follow the Buddha's teachings. So then I was saying, then the more narrow definition of a Sangha, I mean the actual Sangha, is those who've realized the Four Noble Truths, those who are Arya beings, who've directly realized the selflessness or emptiness, the main thing that the Buddha taught. But I think for us, I mean, in this context now, we're, in a Western Dharma center, oftentimes people ask the question, well, in order to become enlightened or to become liberated from samsara, to become free from suffering, do you have to become ordained? So what do you think? No, you don't have to. Because the truth that Buddha taught is just a truth. It exists there, so anybody can realize that. It's not that you have to become ordained to realize that. But then, the question comes, well, then why did Buddha show the example of living as an ordained person? Like, because the Buddha it's very it would be extremely controversial if someone did now. He was married and he had a child, and he left his wife and child in order to just meditate in the jungle, right? So why did he show that kind of extreme aspect? Because he can show any aspect he wants, right? And that's thinking in terms of like that the Buddha was already enlightened a long time ago, and then was just showing the aspect of taking ordinary human rebirth to a king, and then leaving the home, and then teaching the Dharma, and then for 40 years and so forth, which is the way we usually view Shakyamuni Buddha in the Tibetan tradition. Whereas some other Buddhist traditions would view Shakyamuni Buddha as having actually been just an ordinary person in the first part of his life, and then actually having achieved enlightenment at the age of 36 and so forth. But in the Tibetan tradition, it's more like, well, that was all just a display in order to guide later disciples like us. Mm-hmm.
Did he do that to establish monasteries?
Well, in a way, yes. Yeah, in a way. Well, I think, in a way to establish monasteries, because monasteries serve the function of, a community of people who devote all of their time and energy to studying and practicing and propagating and teaching what the Buddha taught. So, for any of you who've been practicing for, a few months even, it's very difficult to change your mind. You don't even have to have been practicing for a few months. Anyone who's had the aspiration to become like more patient or more calm or less angry or more kind of mentally focused knows it's difficult to do. It's not easy to transform our mind. Or if we have had depression and try to just lift yourself out of that, it's very difficult to change our mind, like whoever we are, whatever circumstance we're in. Even, everything's going well, but we're still not dissatisfied. Just to find satisfaction in life is also not easy, right? So basically to transform a mind is very difficult. And then, just in an ordinary way. But then if you look at the kind of goals that the Buddha has set for us, not just to transform our mind so that we're peaceful and happy in this life, but so that we in the future, in our next life, we take another human rebirth. Extremely difficult to do, right? And then not only in the next life we take a human rebirth, or for several lives we take a fortunate rebirth where we can continue, in which we can continue practicing our spiritual path, right? Because we know for most of us, like, we have no control. Just like when we fall asleep and we have dreams, do you have control over like what you dream? Very few people do. There is like lucid dreaming where people can gain some control, it seems. I haven't myself, but it's very difficult to have control over what you dream. So similarly, when you die, then your stream of consciousness becomes separated from the body. Then what appears to your mind is really just a product of the kind of actions you've done in the past and the way you've habituated your mind in the past, right? Just like what we dream about largely depends on the kind of experiences and the kind of thoughts and emotions we habituate ourselves to in waking life. Then at the time we die, the sort of experiences we have, and which determine the kind of rebirth we go into, is really determined by the sort of habits we've developed for ourselves, not only in this life but also in past lives, which is kind of the scary part. In this life we could think, okay, I'm a good person, but according to Buddhist view of the person, like, it doesn't just start with this life. We have infinite past lives, so we've done all kinds of things in those lives. So what's going to determine what sort of karma will ripen, right? But oh yeah, so I was saying it's difficult to transform our minds, right? So just to become, happier and more kind of, whole and sort of content person in this life is difficult, much less achieving future, happy future lives, much less achieving liberation from samsara, which means like that we no longer involuntarily die and take rebirth through the force of karma, but we're free from that whole, completely free from the process of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Like we've totally gotten out of that cycle, which is difficult for us to even imagine what that really means. It's difficult to imagine. Just like it's difficult for imagine what a fish, like if you ask them, well, what is the lake or what is the ocean? Because they've never been outside of that, it's really difficult to see like what actually that is and imagine what it would be like to be outside of that is very difficult, right? So, and that's just liberation from samsara. Then enlightenment is a whole bigger thing. I mean, so much bigger thing. And it's always interesting. It just, became quite clear to me recently reading some of the Pali Sutras that it stands out to me, having studied in the Tibetan tradition where we study the Prajnaparamita Sutras, the Sanskrit Sutras, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, where the Buddha talks a lot about the Bodhisattva path and enlightenment and what it means to be enlightened and what you do to achieve enlightenment. But then if you go back and read the Pali Sutras, which are taught to a different class of disciples, then it really stands out that here the Buddha is obviously something very different and has qualities that are far excel those of the other prominent arhats and prominent disciples in those sutras, like Shariputra and Moggallana and Mahakashyapa. The Buddha obviously has qualities that are very different from those, but he doesn't explain like how it is that he became like that and why they're different, So that's where the kind of the Sanskrit or the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras sort of fill that gap. Like how is it that the Shakyamuni Buddha is so different from the others? Okay, so then enlightenment is so much something else. But the Buddha in teaching over 40 years, he taught how to achieve all of that. How to achieve sort of peace and happiness in this life, how to achieve happy future rebirths, how to achieve liberation from samsara, and how to achieve full enlightenment, right? And he taught, so he taught over a long time, and then later generations of first ancient Indian practitioners, and then later, as Buddhism disseminated to Sri Lanka and then China, and then all the other traditional Buddhist countries, including Tibet, then later generations of practitioners then explain like what is clarified, what is the Buddha saying, and some of the unclear points try to clarify, and where the sutras seem to contradict each other, how are those actually not contradictory? So what I'm getting at is actually to uphold the Buddha's teachings. Well, the Buddha's teachings has two forms. Any of you know? What are the two forms of Buddhist teachings? I have to test the Kadampa Center a little bit, see what's going on here. There's basically. There's the scriptural teachings, which is the word of the Buddha, which is like the written word. And then the action is there's the actual experience of the Buddha's teachings, which means the internal realizations. So it's called the realizational teachings, you could say. So that means basically from the path of seeing on up, the path of seeing, path of meditation, and the path of no more learning, all the wisdom and compassion and the different realizations in the mind of an Arya being, someone who's directly realized emptiness. Those are all that's the actual Buddhist teachings, right? The scriptural teachings are all for the purpose of helping us generate realizations, right? That's the whole purpose of all the scriptures and all the study. So, what you can see, in the West, what we're really good at is information. We're like super good at learning a lot. We're super good at being intelligent and rational and publishing books and making information widely available and organizing classes. But what we're not so good at is just like sitting quietly meditating, right? It's difficult to do, especially as, in the pace of our modern societies. And there's a train, it's like it came on cue. The train came by, this train racing by outside. In the pace of our modern society, then it means also our mind is more fast-paced. Our mind is racing more, and it's difficult to just settle down and to slow down the mind. So then it's difficult to concentrate very well, where instead of our attention being first on one thing, then another thing, then our attention could just be on one thing, like for a long time, and not just one static thing, but even one set of questions or one set of issues to think deeply about that, and then even when we think deeply and intellectually realize something by thinking deeply about it, to fully integrate that in our being by totally absorbing our mind in it in a non-conceptual way. That's something that again, it's something difficult to find an example of because it doesn't happen much in ordinary life. But when you look at the history of, lately I'm quite interested in looking at sort of, the history of, I've spent some years learning about the history of Buddhist philosophy. Although in the monastery we don't focus on learning about history that much, but I like history a lot, so I kind of know a little bit about the history of Buddhist philosophy, the history of ancient Indian philosophy, and a little bit Chinese. But if you look at, one thing that stands out about the history of ancient Indian philosophy is that it's always been combined with meditation, with meditative concentration, which means with the practice of sitting and stilling the mind and generating very subtle states of concentration, whereby, as an indication of how subtle it is like the baseline, which is calm abiding, shine, or calm abiding. The baseline of the jhanas, or the concentrations. There's 4 concentrations of the form realm and 4 of the formless realm, which are common to both Buddhism and Hinduism, and probably common to Taoist traditions in China also, further east. But the sort of the baseline, which is just the precursor to any of those, is where you can keep you pick an object of concentration, say your breath or a visualized image of the Buddha, and then you decide to focus your attention on that. And then for at least 4 hours, you can your attention will effortlessly stay there, effortlessly, like without being distracted whatsoever, right? Without any distraction whatsoever, and without having to make effort, just by the force of your determining or intending to keep your attention there, your attention stays there, right? And through the force of that intention, you experience physical and mental bliss and pliancy. So bliss means, physical bliss is like your body feels light, like cotton. So there's no physical obstruction to sitting. Like for most of us, to sit more than 15 minutes becomes difficult, right? So, and yeah, there's all kinds of aches and pains and disease, right? So this physical bliss means your body is light, like cotton wool. And mental bliss means there's just, incredible sense of pleasure and well-being, and joy as well. And then pliancy means there's no obstruction or no obstacle to just focusing your mind as you wish at all, right? So again, there's physical pliancy, which again means your body is very flexible and pliant, and there's no discomfort or disease. You can sit, you can sit perfectly comfortably for as long as you want, or at least 4 hours, this baseline. And mental pliancy means there's not even the slightest kind of sense that you want to think about something else, or that you don't want to do this. So it means like you're totally content just being focused on whatever it is you decided to focus on. Again, it's difficult to imagine, but that's just the baseline. And then from there, you have to abandon other levels of obscuration just to achieve the first concentration, and then the second concentration, third concentration, and on up. So the mind becomes more and more concentrated. But what I'm saying is, in ancient Indian, the history of ancient Indian philosophy, the intellectual side has always gone together with this like training and concentrating the mind, right? So, and that's something, if you look at the Western philosophy, in Western philosophy there's a lot of very similar assertions, from ancient Greek philosophers to philosophers in the Middle Ages to more recent philosophers like David Hume and Heidegger. There's very similar assertions to the kind of emptiness and selflessness and interdependence that the Buddha is talking about. Even these days, if you look at quantum mechanics, there's some quantum physicists have quite similar assertions about, everything is interdependent, and if you look for a specific thing, it's not findable. You're looking for this mug, you can't find precisely that mug. All you find is, or like Whitehead also, all you find is a set of interrelated phenomena that are continually in flux and changing. But in the Western philosophical tradition, there hasn't been this coupling with meditative concentration, right? So that's the really big challenge for us Western Buddhists now. I mean, translating all the texts, still that's just beginning, and that's a huge project in and of itself. But still, that's just the scriptural teaching of the Buddha. What we really need to be aiming for and focusing on is generating the realizational teaching of the Buddha. So just within FPMT, for the last few years, Lama Zopa Rinpoche has been saying often, first of all, Lama Geshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, they started the master's program, which started the Institute of Lama Tsongkhapa in Italy. And then there's the basic studies program now, which is for a slightly shorter version. Those are both versions of the Geshe studies program that traditionally exists in Sera, Drepung, Ganden, which is what I'm studying, what I'm participating in. And then for more introductory level, there's Buddhism in a Nutshell and discovering Meditation 101 and discovering Buddhism. So those programs, in FPMT we have quite a good set of educational programs, from the introduction level to intermediate and to advanced level, being the master's program, and facilities where those are offered by very well qualified geshes and translators and all the other staff that are required to help offer those programs. But in the last few years, Lama Zopa Rinpoche has been saying that now we have good education programs, but we need people to actually generate realizations, right? So just, a lot of people knowing a lot about what the Buddha taught is of course not nearly enough. We need people that actually embody what the Buddha taught by generating realizations and living, changing themselves as a person and changing their lives in a way that just meeting them and talking with them, you feel like, oh, this person is something different. This person really, to me, embodies what it means to be a good person, in the most profound sense. I think, for many, for most of us, probably, I know for me, one time someone asked me, actually it was this Thangka painter, there's this famous Thangka painter, who just painted this huge Tara tanka in Bendigo for the stupa of universal compassion. I don't remember his name now. It's not Andy Weber. It's a lesser known one. Peter Isley, yeah, Peter Isley, yeah. Once I was talking with Peter Isley in Dharamsala, and he asked me, because we were talking about, how we first sort of found Buddhism and decided, to kind of follow this path, and because I think he was a student of Lama Geshe, maybe. He was one of the quite early students now. But then he was kind of explaining why he never wanted to become a monk, and he was asking me, like, why I went to, to do this Geshe studies program. And this was like 10 years ago, probably, which takes so long. I mean, it's a 19-year study program. But I was, I kind of, because we didn't have much time, and so I just, sometimes it helps, you're just forced to condense things in a few words. So I said, well, basically, I met my first teacher, Lama Lundup. He's the former abbot of Kopan Monastery. And he just, basically it was just by meeting him that I decided, well, I want to be like that. I mean, basically. So it's one thing to study like Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist teachings. Like at that time when I first met Lama Lundup, I'd already been really like kind of bowled over by the idea of bodhicitta. I studied Zen Buddhism in college and learned how to meditate, and I found that extremely helpful, which is sort of what led me to India and Kopan Monastery gradually. But I didn't really know about selflessness or emptiness, and that didn't really make sense to me when I first heard of it. I wasn't kind of concerned about that, but the whole explanation of why we experience suffering and why we experience fortune and misfortune is because of karma, because of our own past actions. That also made like really a lot of sense to me. To me, it's a really strong explainer for like why things happen in my life, and a strong guide for like, well, how should I change the way I live my life, right? Just stop harming others and try to benefit others as much as I can. It's quite easy sort of principle to live by. But then I never really heard of or never took seriously the idea of bodhicitta, that every sentient being has the potential to become fully enlightened, completely free, which means completely free of every fault and having perfected every positive quality. So having perfected, developed to its utmost degree love and compassion and patience and kindness and wisdom and skillful means, right? So that idea also, I really thought, wow, this is amazing. This is something that is far beyond any kind of goal I ever imagined. But then just knowing that and that kind of resonating with you and aspiring to that is completely different to meeting someone who you feel really embodies that. Like meeting someone who you feel is like clearly, you feel because, the way they talk, the way they give you attention, the way they look, the way they do things, the way they answer questions, just everything they do is like clearly something much more, I don't know, this profound, much more kind, much more humble, much more wise than other people you might have met. Then that is such a strong, for many of us, like having met the Dalai Lama, even not shook his hand, but even been in a public audience with the Dalai Lama, I've spoken to many people, it's a profoundly moving experience, right? And that's because of the realizational teachings. That's because of the realization in his mind, right? So in Western Buddhism, that's what we need to aim for, is like developing those realizations. So of course, in our practice, that should be our aim. And of course, because it's difficult, so maybe I'll just kind of bring back to a circle with having missed a lot of things that I wanted to talk about, but I better close it up and leave time for questions here. Basically because we can see it's difficult to transform our minds, and if you really want to do that, then I think the example the Buddha was showing is it's much easier if you just stop doing everything else and just focus on doing that. Just study and try to live a very moral life by really putting a special effort into it, abandoning killing, stealing, lying, and all the other non-virtuous actions which are described in the vows of a monk or nun. So you live according to the vows, and then you devote as much time as you can into studying and meditating on the Buddhist teachings, and also of course serving the Buddhist community. But I see there's a little bit of a danger. Now it's kind of like we're in the very sort of infantile stages, I guess, can you say, of the beginning stages of Buddhism coming to the West, like from the East. And now you see there's other Buddhist organizations, I don't know so much, but the way FPMT evolved is like, the first FPMT monks and nuns lived in Solukhumbu and then at Kopan. And then they had to leave Nepal for political reasons. And then they all moved to Dharamsala, to Shushita. So when Lama Yeshe was alive, for a while there were like, I think, over 100 monks and nuns living with Lama Zopa and Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe at Tushita in Dharamsala. But then as Dharma centers like this arose in different countries and different continents, then gradually, and also, unfortunately, Lama Yeshe passed away at a young age. When Lama Yeshe passed away, many monks and nuns kind of found it sort of unbearable and felt totally without a guide and left the ordained Sangha. But still, many kept serving in centers. But also, as centers arose around the world, then Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche sent ordained Sangha out to serve those centers, to serve as teachers and meditation guides, and also, managers and as spiritual program coordinators and all kind of things. But there's a little bit of danger that, because, just to give up your lay clothes, lay name, lay identification, and shave your head is easy, but to actually become like a good monk or nun is not easy. Like, because as a good monk or nun, you should be in the way the way you talk, the way you carry yourself physically, the way you interact with others. You should be a role model for other Buddhist practitioners. But it's really difficult to do that if you haven't had the proper training and haven't actually ever lived in an environment where you're given the best conditions to be a role model, right? So there's a little bit of danger, and in FPMT there's not that many like monasteries and nunneries where people can receive that. Monks and nuns can receive that kind of training. So I hope that's something that in the future we'll have more of and better quality of. Of course there is, Nalanda Monastery is doing an excellent job, and there's the Chenrezig nuns community in Australia. And there's, just starting a new nunnery in France, which is just starting now. Then there's Bendigo in there's Bendigo, or what is it called? Tupten Shederbling, I think. Anyway, there's a small monastery, but it's only 3 or 4 monks in Australia. And then, unfortunately, in the U.S., there's none. There's no monastic community in the U.S. So that's something we need to work on in the future. I aspire to work on in the future. There's a couple others. There are a couple others, I should say. Well, there's where I live at Sera Monastery, in the IMI house. We're a group of 6 monks from different countries living and participating in the Geshe Studies program at Sera. So yeah, we're one of the monastic communities. And then Institute of Lama Tsongkhapa also, there's some monks, there's a monks community, and there's a group of nuns, and they have land and they're starting a new monastery and nunnery side by side there. But I know at this center there are 3 resident nuns, and I fully rejoice. I've never had the experience of actually, since I took refuge, I've always lived in Asia. Actually, I've never had the experience of actually living as a formal Buddhist in the United States, much less as a monk. And to me, it's still a little scary somewhat, because I'm not sure how it will go. But so I really respect, all the ordained Sangha who live in Western countries, and especially those who serve, as most do, to serve centers like this. It's wonderful, the work that they do and the example that they set. And we need, it's not that every monk or nun should all do the same thing. It's according to each individual's disposition. Some really like to do service, or some their guru tells them to do service. So then, of course, doing that is the best thing for them to do. Whereas some like to, be kind of more on the intellectual side and study and teach, and then some prefer to kind of quietly meditate on their own. But we need all of those different roles to be played. To have a fully well-rounded and kind of flourishing Buddhist community. Yeah, so why don't I stop here? I know I haven't said anything really about life at Sera or about debate yet, but we only have 5 minutes left until 6:30. So if you have any questions, I can try to answer questions. Yes. I don't know, you have a mic. Okay.
So my question is about debate
Mm-hmm.
and being a Western monk at Sera.
Mm.
So when you debated, did you debate with the other Western monks? Did you debate in the big courtyard? What did you do?
Yeah. So you've been to Sera, I know. So there's a huge courtyard there, very beautiful courtyard with big trees, anyway, fig trees, I think. Actually, tamarind trees. But so we debate in this huge open courtyard, which is about probably 3 acres all total. And there's usually when most of the monks are there, there's about 1,400, 1,500 monks. But in my class now, there are about 80 monks who come to debate. So we have to debate with our classmates. So in my class, I'm the only Western monk. So I debate with the other Western monks in the kitchen at home. That's one of our favorite things to do in the kitchen, or in the veranda around the house. But no, formally in the debate courtyard, I usually wouldn't debate with them. You can debate with monks from other classes, but the next Western monk below me is like three classes below me. So usually I don't go down and debate with him. And the reason you mostly debate with your classmates is because you're working through texts every year. We're working through a text. So like this year is probably the most pages of text I've ever had to go through in one year. We have to go through about 500 pages of a Vinaya text this year. So like at my class, it really means that we need to debate with other people who've read, like every day we'll go through about 5 pages of the text. So in order to be able to go through that material, we need to be debating with other people who read that material recently, so it's fresh in their mind, so that we can discuss all the different points that are discussed in that material. But it's less the case for lower classes, especially in the first 3 years. The amount of text they have to go through in 1 year is very small, and there's a room for all kinds of creative and sort of more freestyle debate going all over the place, so that it's easier to debate with other people from other classes. But yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Thanks. Could I just ask you, Venerable, how you spend your days as at Sera Jey? In other words, how much practice do you do, or how much praying or learning, or we want to know.
Sure. Yeah. I understand. Yeah. That's
how
the way
many
to
meals?
start.
How many meals do you?
Yeah. From the title of the talk, that's probably what you expected to hear first. No.
What time do you wake up and go to bed?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So usually I wake up between 5:30 and 6, maybe 5 and 6. Actually, if we have monastery pujas in the morning, which sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, then they usually start around 5:30. So then I have to wake up around 5 to sort of get out of the house by 5:15. Then it takes 15 minutes just to walk to the prayer hall, and then start pujas at 5:30. But if we don't have pujas, then we can sleep in a little longer. We have to be up by 6. Most of the houses in the monastery, everyone has to get up by 6 o'clock. And then. Well, for me personally, person to person, it varies a little bit. So one of the reasons for because I live in a house with other Western monks, which, in the monastery of like 3,000 monks, there are only about 10 or 12 Western monks. And in our house, there's 6. So, but one of the reasons for having that house is to give us a little more freedom in how we structure our time, right? So when I wake up at 6, then usually the first thing I'll do is my own meditation and prayer practice. And that takes about an hour. And then I have breakfast at 7. And then, so it's like 7 to 7. Usually, while I'm eating breakfast, I usually start reading what I have to read for the day. So then I eat and read until about 8. And then from 8 to 9, usually I memorize. which means usually outside, walking up and down, or sitting in my room and trying to memorize different divisions within the text, which are like outlines, the outlines of the text and definitions of important phrases, and then the quotations, important scriptural quotations, and sometimes whole root texts. Like I don't know if any of you've studied the Ornament of Clear Realization is one root text, which is about 30 pages long in a small book size. So like I spent 3 years memorizing that text, which is a very long time, but so that's basically the morning until 9 o'clock. And then about half of the days of the year we'll have debate, then from 9 o'clock to like 11 o'clock. So that means we go to the debate courtyard and then we discuss the material we've been reading and that we're debating that time. So sometimes for about half the time, well, the debate time is divided into about 3 different periods. So for about 1/3 of the time, we debate one-on-one with a partner. So when we go to the debate courtyard, then we'll just pair off with someone from our class, and we debate one-on-one. One person sits and answers, and another is the interrogator. They ask questions. And then for about 1/3 of the time, we'll sit in groups of between 10 and 20 monks, and then 2 monks will sit and answer, and then the other monks get up and debate. So that's especially like in the Vinaya class now, that's the more important time, because that's when we've all read through like the same 5 pages of text for that day. And so we all kind of, different people remember different things more clearly. So we all go through that text and discuss the main points, and the unclear things we try to work out and just help each other. And it's super helpful. I mean, that's why like if you're studying like you're studying Lam Rim now, I think. But it's incredibly important, I think, to have discussion groups. Like in the West, we're not, I mean, most centers, we're not going to be able to do debate like they do in the monastery. But just to sit around and discuss things, but discuss things in a way that you mutually agree that you can really ask pointed questions to other people, and they have to do their best to answer. Like you can't just give a vague answer and kind of let it be, but that you mutually agree with each other, that you can really try to get to, clarify exactly what things mean, is a kind of close substitute for debate. And then the last 1/3 of the time when we go at the debate courtyard is we do prayers. All together we'll sit, and like every day we recite the Heart Sutra several times. We recite the Praise to 21 Taras several times. And then we recite other prayers, and sometimes read the sutras. As a way of purifying obscurations, purifying negative karma and obstacles, and accumulating merit for success in our studies. So that goes in the morning. That goes from 9 to 11, and then at 11 we have lunch, and that just takes like half an hour. And then most of the monks study like grammar or poetry or history or other or English or Chinese or other things after lunch for about an hour. And then take an hour nap. Most of the monks all take nap. So if you go walking around the monastery at like between 12 and 1, it's totally quiet. You won't see anyone, because in India it's very hot. It's the midday sun is very hot, and most of the monks are relaxing because, but you'll see. Because so then, like most houses, you have to be awake and kind of resuming your studies by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then from 2 to 5 is really the main time when we read in our rooms. So from 2 to 5, most of the monks are in the rooms reading, sometimes outside reciting and memorizing additional things. And then also there's class, right? So the classes, when we go to our teachers and they explain the text. So that usually happens between 7 and 9 in the morning, and between 1 and 5 in the afternoon. And most monks go to probably anywhere from 2 to 6 classes a week, means class periods a week. Myself, I only have 1 teacher now, so I just go to 2 hours of class a week. I have for the last probably 6-7 years. So that's 2 to 5 is your reading period. Then we have dinner at 5. And then from 6 o'clock, we have to be in the debate courtyard. So from 6 to till about 9, between 9 and 10. It depends on what season of the year it is. But usually from 6 to 6:45, we debate one-on-one with a partner. And then from 6:45 to like 7:45, we debate in a group. And it's the same groups every day. And then from about 8 o'clock to like 9 o'clock, we do prayers all together. And then from about 9 to 9:30, again, we debate one-on-one. And then slowly we go back home after that. So then most monks have like a cup of tea, a snack after debate. And then from about 10 to, from 9:30 or 10 until about 11:30, then we have to be outside reciting the scriptures that we memorized that morning. So in the morning, usually for about an hour, we memorize things we haven't memorized before. And then in the evening, we recite that again. And then we recite all the things we've been memorizing for the past, months or years to keep it in memory. And then most monks do some prayers before they go to bed, and then go to bed about 11:30, 12 o'clock. So that's why we have a nap after lunch, because the sleeping period is really from about 12 to 5 or 6. So you only get about 5 or 6 hours of sleep a night. So then most monks sleep for an hour or two after lunch to make up.
Could I just ask you, so how do you communicate? I mean, you speak Tibetan, don't you?
Yeah, Tibetan language, yeah. The language medium for the monastery is all Tibetan.
So you need to know Tibetan to speak, right?
Yeah, that's
Even
the
though
first
you're
thing you do when you
English.
join the monastery is learn Tibetan. There's monks, because there are monks there from like Ladakh, Mongolia, Nepal. So we all have to speak a common language, so that's Tibetan, yeah. Yeah, so now our time is, okay. Yeah, we do a dedication? Okay. So think of all the merit we've created together, and we rejoice. Think how wonderful it is. And then rejoice in all the merit created by all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 3 times and 10 directions, and especially our own spiritual teachers, His Holiness Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and others. And then the merit created by all sentient beings we rejoice in. So all this merit we dedicate that the Buddha's teachings, especially on this occasion, that the Buddha's teachings may continue to spread and flourish, and where they have spread, may they not decline. Where they have not spread before, may they newly arise. And especially in the West, may the Buddha's teachings flourish in a very authentic way, whatever way is most beneficial for all sentient beings. And to that end, may our Guru's lives be long and stable, and may all of our actions may only be most pleasing to and never displease the Guru's holy mind for even one moment. And through all their lives, may we never be separated from the Buddha's teachings and from fully qualified Mahayana Gurus. So in short, may all sentient beings be free from every form of suffering, physical or mental suffering. And have every peace and happiness up to full enlightenment. And for this purpose, especially may Lama Tsongkhapa's pure teachings continue to flourish. And also may Kadampa Center itself continue to flourish and be able to offer more and more to the Buddhist community and the wider community here in North Carolina. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, Venerable.
You're welcome.